Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of What the FinTech, the podcast from the team behind FinTech Futures and the Banking Technology magazine. My name is Paul Hindle, editor of FinTech Futures, and for this episode we're joined by Mats Persson Bergius, Chief Commercial Officer at Danish digital bank Lunar. Mats, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Paul. Great to be here.
Excellent. It was great to have you here. And just to get started, would you like to quickly let us know a bit more about yourself and Lunar then?
Yeah, no, definitely. So like you said, I'm Mats. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Lunar. Been with Lunar for about coming up on just over 4 years now, and been the Chief Commercial guy here for the last coming up on a year. So I've really been on the journey for quite some time, just in terms of seeing us expand across the Nordic region. Before joining Lunar, I was in the sort of payments and financial services industry for another 15 years, mainly in large corporates. So very different to come into a scale-up environment, but super exciting ride. And I'll happy to tell you a bit more about Lunar and a little bit about the backdrop as well, of course.
Excellent. And yes, for sure, we'll be diving into that shortly. And again, thanks so much for taking the time out to speak with us today, Matt. On the show this week, we'll be diving into the Nordic digital banking landscape and how Lunar has been looking to scale its own offering across the region as the digital bank approaches its 10th birthday this year. We'll find out a little more about Lunar's journey so far and the growth of digital banking in the Nordics, how the company has looked to approach its digital product strategy to stand out from the crowd and take on the established institutions in the region, and of course the bank's plans for expansion moving forward. So start off then, Mats, can you give us some insight into how the digital banking landscape has evolved over the last few years, both in Denmark and the wider Nordics region?
I think what's quite unique about the Nordics in a way is that digital banking is completely hygiene in all of the countries in which we operate. If you look at bank branches, for example, nobody almost ever goes to a branch anymore. I think we have the lowest, at least in our region, is Norway, right, where you basically have 5 branches or something like that per 100,000 individuals, right? The EU average is something like 15. So it's a third of the average, and basically a population in these countries is just extremely digital and very aware in terms of how to use digital payment mechanisms and digital banking to kind of fulfill their own banking requirements. And if you look at what are the most downloaded apps in the region, it will be digital bank apps, it will be payment apps, it will be digital ID apps, right, that are definitely top of the list from a most used app perspective. So it is a extremely digitized market, of course, not just when it comes to banking, but in general, population is very digitally savvy. But I think we feel it particularly when it comes to financial services, that it is a great place to operate if you want to run a digital bank. But on the other hand, you have to really make sure that you deliver a fantastic service, because your customers are accustomed to having a great digital bank experience also from the incumbents that we compete with.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it slightly there as well. I mean, but how different would you say the Nordic digital banking landscape is from other areas of Europe then?
No, but I think it's exactly that. The competition is just significantly fiercer when it comes to how good is the experience, particularly from the incumbents. And I think that's where we look when we look at what is the competitive set that we operate against. It's not so much that we have a plethora of other service providers like ourselves. I think we're the established digital challenger in the region. And then you have some fantastic companies that are offering niche services, can be within investments or within savings or within lending or other areas. But when we look at who's the competitive set from a banking and by extension digital banking point of view, it is really the incumbents that we have our eyes set on. So I think that's one component. I think the other thing you have to think about is what are kind of customer expectations and customer familiarity. I mean, the markets are just extremely digitized, as we already mentioned, but they're also very much focused around digital payments. Nobody ever or very rarely uses cash. I think Sweden and Norway have the lowest usage of cash in the world. I think it's about 1% of GDP is made up of cash. I think the Eurozone average is around sort of 10, 11%, something like that. So it's like everyone is just very digital and has very high expectations on digital service provisions from anyone that they interact with, but by extension also from their banks.
Excellent. Sounds great. And how would you say Lunar fits into that landscape then? And can you tell us a bit more about Lunar's journey so far?
Yeah, definitely. So our focus is that we want to be the primary digital bank. We want to be the primary bank for our users. We want everybody to have if you have Lunar as a bank, it is where you house your full economy. You have your salary account with us. You have your savings with us. You handle all of your day-to-day payments with us. And we're full service for both consumers and for small businesses. So our heritage is really coming from being a sort of financial control app, basically card and great insights into your spending, that type of setup that we saw a lot about a few years ago. But now we have really evolved that offering into being the primary bank with full payments, full savings, full transaction services for both consumers and small businesses. And if we think about why users come to us, they come to us because they're looking for a better digital experience. About 1/3 of the folks that join us say, okay, I need a better digital experience than I get from my existing bank or from incumbent banks. We have another third that come to us because they're recommended Lunar by a friend. So we're incredibly excited about the growth momentum that we're able to see just because of the fact that expectations are high when it comes to digital banking. We believe we are the best choice in the region. Our users that are coming to us seem to agree with that, and they're increasingly engaging in that full service proposition that we bring to the table.
Excellent. And I mean, one thing that particularly caught our attention just after I started at FinTech Futures actually back in 2022 was a promotional video of Will Ferrell repeating the word Lunar dozens of times facing the camera. Can you tell us the story behind that? And is he still an investor in the company?
Yeah, he definitely is, right? So he's been on board since then. And I think it was really a fantastic way of creating some great brand awareness around Lunar. It was an incredibly successful campaign where, I mean, a brand awareness that we had, which was actually already at that point fairly decent, especially in Denmark, but also pretty good in Sweden, Norway, actually more than doubled from as an outcome of that campaign, because it was just a brilliant way of getting a well-known person to not just create a buzz around the brand, right, but also create some, also with the part ownership perspective, some advocacy towards the mission that we're on, bringing better everyday banking to consumers and small businesses. And of course, as he said, getting people to download the Lunar app. That was really the key message. So I think it was an incredible campaign. It worked really well at that point to build some fantastic brand awareness and create some great buzz.
Yeah. And I guess obviously you mentioned at the start of the show as well, trying to take on the established institutions in the region. You know, how have you looked to approach your digital product strategy then to stand out from the crowd and differentiate yourself and attract customers and build that market share, I guess?
Our strategy is very much one of going deep in the home countries in which we operate. So there's a number of great companies out there in Europe that have taken a fairly shallow but cross-market scalable proposition, can be around, for example, FX or international transfers or that type of a proposition. And then it's not localized. It is just a standardized proposition that you can easily port from country to country because it doesn't require you to have a lot of local integrations. And therefore, it also becomes a very useful user experience for that particular job to be done, but also very shallow because the only job that can be done is that specific job that you use the service for. We are different because we are looking to provide the full suite of services for our users. And that means that we need to have local accounts with local IBANs. We need to be integrated into the local clearing schemes so that we can provide, for example, faster payments and local batch payments and local gyro payments and all of the other types of payments that customers expect. We need to be able to support the relevant local mobile payment schemes. We need to be able to support local investment appetites and savings needs, whether those are sort of cash propositions and tax shelter propositions like ISAs or the local ISA equivalents in each of the countries, or whether those are even crypto trading, right, which is also something else that we support as the only bank in the region within a banking app. So we're really looking to go deep and provide that localized banking experience, but in a new and modern and digital packaging. And I think that's why we're seeing the traction that we're seeing, because users are coming to us. We just passed the 1 million user mark, right, which we're incredibly excited about. But we know that these users come to us because they're looking for that better digitized banking experience that still meets their needs of a local service provider that they can still use to pay the bills, get the salary in, make transfers of money to their friends in the local payment systems, etc.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, given how quickly digital acceleration has been progressing over recent years, I mean, just how difficult is it to keep up with the rate of technological change at the moment? And how has Lunar been looking to integrate new developments in areas like generative AI and hyper-personalization, for example, to keep up to date and make sure you're meeting shifting customer demands?
I would say first of all, AI is a massive opportunity for us in the sense of just we are laser focused on the customer experience, and in the sense of just being able to provide that better customer experience, AI can massively help. So that's one way we're looking at it. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. I think the other way we're deploying AI is just to give all of our team in the bank superpowers to handle our customer inquiries and also regulatory requirements in a better way. But first of all, from a customer-facing point of view, we actually integrated already last year AI-based interaction interface into the app, where at any point in time, you can just swipe up the AI and you can not just ask it questions in terms of like, okay, where do I see my PIN, or how do I transfer money between accounts, or whatever your question might be, which is actually a great feature in the sense that we're becoming more and more used as individuals to ask. It used to be you ask Google, but now you probably ask ChatGPT, depending on what your preference is in AI brands. How do I do this and that, right? And now you can do the same in your bank. If you're struggling for more than a few seconds with finding that feature that you're looking for, you swipe up, you get it from the AI. And then the way we've enhanced it is that also the AI can actually help you execute on stuff. It's not really in a place where we let it make money transfers yet. But if you want to, for example, set up a savings goal or do something in terms of fixing something to do with your debit cards, for example, then it can actually interact with you and do that on your behalf rather than just pointing you to, okay, you have to go to this menu and you can execute and you can set up a goal, a savings goal there, for example. So we're starting deploying the customer-facing AI there, and then we're pretty excited about where it can actually go over time. But we are also in a business of trust. So we want to deploy some features, we want to get some customer reactions, and then we'll figure out how do we build on that from here. Then I think from an internal standpoint, it's really incredible what you can do just in terms of helping our support staff actually manage customer inquiries better by giving them access to, what all companies used to have is like massive libraries and knowledge bases of frequently asked questions of customers and how do you support them. All of that is now at the fingertips of anyone who's handling a customer interaction and can really answer and service those inquiries. If they are more complex and end up coming through to a customer service agent, our teams are able to basically answer those inquiries in a much better and more efficient and holistic way than they used to do. So I think those are a couple of the use cases. We're also seeing some really intriguing usage in areas that are related to how do you bring in and perform the adequate due diligence on new customers that you're onboarding. But again, we are in the business of trust and we have quite significant regulatory obligations to live up to as a fully licensed bank. Therefore, we are also looking carefully at how do we deploy generative AI, especially in the best possible way, also to meet regulatory expectations across the entire banking value chain that we operate in.
Excellent. And I mean, with some areas of the Nordics being quite remote as well, I mean, what challenges does that present for banks to ensure financial inclusion in those areas? And are you seeing an uptick in customers adopting digital banking in more remote regions as well?
I think what's intriguing about financial inclusion, right, is that we have to probably think about how do we define it and what's the role that we have to play in that. I think definitely from what we're seeing, we want to provide an alternative to the incumbent banks. We want to provide a simpler to use, easier to understand, more fun way of interacting with your money, a way of interacting that gives you better financial control, better oversight of where you're spending, and better ways of also hitting the brakes, if you will, if you see that maybe you're overspending in certain categories or you're spending too fast in comparison to when your next paycheck is going to hit. And I think there we certainly are making great traction in terms of bringing more people on the journey. If you look at areas of the country where maybe there's fewer bank branches, or areas of the country where understanding of the complex banking lingo that incumbent banks love to deploy, those are areas where we're seeing opportunities are actually taking market share because we are seen as an alternative that is simply easier to use and one that sort of brings down the barriers to actually managing your money in an efficient way. So I think what you see digital banks like Lunar doing is essentially helping making sure that more people have access to straightforward financial services and are able to get a better understanding of how to manage their money, not by doing courses or financial literacy initiatives or putting people essentially back to school, right? But just giving them a useful tool that gives you a better and more efficient way of managing your money in your day-to-day.
Get ready. Celebrating the best in banking and fintech innovation, the Banking Tech Awards are returning for another year. Nominations are opening soon, so whether you're a disruptor, an industry leader, or a rising star, this is your chance to shine. Stay tuned for updates on the website and start prepping your entries. Will you be a winner?
And I mean, Lunar raised 24.1 million euros last year to fuel a full-scale expansion across Sweden. Can you give us an update on your progress there?
I think we've had some fantastic traction in Sweden. We are live as both a full-service consumer bank as well as a full-service digital bank. The challenging thing about the Nordics in general is that across the region, we have between, depending on how you do the math, sort of 35 to 40 different payment schemes. And in Sweden, we have the pleasure of integrating with at least 5 of these mobile payment schemes, gyro payment schemes, local clearing schemes, etc. And it is something that is complicated and takes time, but has to be done if you want to be that primary service provider for your users. And obviously, we've been on the same journey in Denmark and also on the same journey in Norway. Now we are live with that great consumer proposition. We're live with a great business proposition where we are really in a position to deploy to our users the full service suite. Whether you are a consumer user, you can have transaction accounts with us, salary accounts, you can have shared accounts with the family or even with friends. You can have kids accounts, so you can basically manage your whole family economy with us. You can invest with us. You can use services for borrowing. You can even now get a mortgage in Sweden with Lunar through a collaboration that we have. And then on the business side, it's the same thing. We have the full suite of payment schemes, which is super important for business users. We have abilities to manage your money and make sure you pay your VAT on time. We've got integrations towards the largest bookkeeping systems and so on and so forth. So super excited about the products that we've been able to deploy. We are on a journey in terms of raising awareness of the fact that we have all of these great services with Lunar, and we've seen some amazing traction both with consumers, also off the back of a launch that we did in the airline co-brand space with the Scandinavian Airlines last year, but also definitely in the business space where there seems to be massive pent-up demand from small businesses that are just looking to a digital alternative to the incumbent banks that they have been essentially forced to do business with historically, where now finally there's a digital alternative that doesn't force you to find and drive into a bank branch just to get an account, that don't charge exorbitant fees just to keep your accounts open, etc. So super excited about what we're seeing both in the consumer space, but very clearly also the massive demand that we have in the business space. So much more exciting news, I think, to come around that.
Sounds great. And I mean, what would you say are the big challenges for a digital bank in trying to scale in the current economic climate? And in what ways have you looked to adapt to ensure your continued growth?
I think as a scale up, you always have to alter and work with how do you best meet customer demands in the ever evolving market that we operate in. Of course, we continuously look at what is our investment allocation, what are we spending our money on, and how do we make sure that we deploy that capital in the best possible way. We're also focusing our tech investments in areas that really make the biggest difference to both our users, but also to our bottom line from a financial perspective. And it's funny because as we've gone through that exercise, you can often find areas where it is fairly straightforward to kind of look at how you optimize your investments into areas that drive massive customer value. For example, a customer-facing AI can be one, right? You make it easier for customers to get the support that they want to have at their fingertips 24/7. But at the same time, that means that there's no longer the same need to actually get in touch and talk to us about a specific issue or service that you require.
And achieving profitability is always the holy grail for digital banks. How's your progress been there?
We are continuing to focus on driving towards profitability, and we certainly have that goal. We're not necessarily putting a specific date on that at this point, but we're making great progress towards that goal as we're both focusing our investments to strengthen our top line, but also carefully scrutinizing what we have going on the cost line.
Excellent. So what are Lunar's plans for expansion then moving forward? Are there currently any plans to move into any new markets, or is there any M&A activity potentially on the cards?
That's a great question. I think we are very focused on going deep and just continuing to pursue that strategy of going deep in each of the countries in which we operate. Now it's a case of really making sure that we are able to leverage on those investments that we've made into our home markets and delivering the best possible customer experience and the best service out of those investments. We are always thinking about what is the right next step when we're ready to take that. So, of course, we've got to have our eye on the current business and then maybe one eye on the horizon. Now we are in 3 distinct currency areas for Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish kronas with all the local requirements that come around that. Of course, it would be exciting at some point to think about what happens when we dip our toes into the Eurozone and start providing services to customers in that space, but not something that is anything that we're working on necessarily at this point. But if we look at the Nordic region, countries in the region that are in the euro, and that would open up the opportunity for further expansion. So definitely something we're thinking about at some point in time.
Sounds great. And you recently launched Lunar Youth as well, which is a dedicated banking app for younger generations. Can you tell us more about your goals there? And was that a gap in the market that you saw in the Nordics?
Definitely. I think it's 2 things, or maybe 3 things. So first of all, this has been one of our most requested products since the launch of Lunar in the very first place. The reason for that is we believe very much the fact that the propositions that are out there and delivered by incumbent banks are not necessarily up to the standards of what the younger generations currently expect, but also quite complicated in terms of onboarding yourself or your family to be able to use those services effectively as part of your family economy. So definitely a lot of demand for that product. From our point of view, if we want to be the full service bank for our user base, then being able to support your full family economy is super important. We've already had transactional accounts or salary accounts. We've had shared accounts, but we were missing accounts for kids and youth, right? So it's the last piece of the puzzle to be able to allow you to actually manage your family economy with Lunar. So it makes a lot of sense from a value proposition perspective to be able to supply that service also. And then, of course, it is something that injects value into our broader offering, and therefore something that we believe we're able to monetize essentially by making sure that more people choose to not just stay with us, put more of their services with us, but also to choose one of our paid plans, which is how in a subscription package, it's how we monetize to a large extent our consumer users. We've actually seen already around launch time, we saw about 10% of the users that were opting into our youth plan. They were also choosing to upgrade to a higher tier plan level or to a more expensive subscription plan because of the extra value that they get from having the youth proposition with us. So I think we're super excited about seeing how can we use youth to provide that service that our customers have been asking for a long time, but also to be able to infuse value into the tier propositions that we're delivering so that more users choose to not just opt into those plans, but use them, stay with us, and bring even more of their economy into Lunar and use us as their primary bank.
Sounds great. And towards the end of last year as well, Lunar spun out its banking as a service division into a standalone entity called Moonrise. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about the rationale behind that move and what kind of progress has that unit seen so far?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an incredibly exciting area. And I do want to nuance a bit maybe what we're doing, because what we are doing is really banking as a service is really broad. What we are doing is taking truly the payments component of what we offer and enabling that also for licensed third parties that are either payment institutions or EMIs or even banks in the European Union. And it comes back to what I said before. There's about 35 to 40-ish different payment schemes, 3 different currencies in the countries in which we operate. And it's just incredibly hard to get into these local payment schemes. But it's super important if you want to be able to offer some sort of local financial service. Can be a payment service, can be some form of lending proposition, even savings propositions, etc. So what we found is that when we went live actually last year or 2 years ago with our kind of full clearing integration, we've got a lot of inquiries around, okay, how can you help not just consumers and businesses, but also other companies access clearing in the Nordics? And essentially, how can Lunar bring down the barriers to enabling a more efficient payment market in the Nordic region? And then, of course, we run that on a great tech platform. We get a lot of fantastic feedback from the clients that we have already that it is just so much more straightforward to work with us because we have a fully API-based model. It's one API that you integrate with. You can then perform clearing settlement across local payment schemes in the Nordic region rather than having to work with incumbent, have multiple integrations and use legacy tech to be able to provide these services across the region. So it's an area where we're seeing incredible demand. There's a massive opportunity for us to actually be able to provide this service. Right now, we're running out around, I think it's 5 billion euros of annualized transaction volume, but it is 100 billion euro plus market. So we think there's plenty of opportunity here to actually be able to facilitate better payment services for consumers and businesses in the Nordic region, not just for our own retail banking clients, but also for other banks and financial institutions that want to be able to offer a great service in local currencies in the Nordic region. And it's a totally different client set, right? What we provide in our retail bank is a service towards consumers and businesses. Here we're dealing with enterprise clients, and that's also why we're separating out Moonrise. We're setting it up as a separate entity, still under Lunar Bank, but as a separate entity that is able to focus on purely serving these enterprise clients and the needs that they have when it comes to being able to access payment schemes, when it comes to being able to access virtual accounts, when it comes to whatever other local alternative payment methods that these businesses are looking for. Well, now we're able to put the focus and the emphasis that it deserves to meet the needs of some of the biggest payment companies in the world as they look to come into the Nordic region.
Excellent. And I guess, what are the plans for Moonrise moving forward then? Are there any developments that you can tell us about right now?
I think right now we are, again, really focused around evolving that proposition around being able to offer the instant payments that we bring to the table in the local Nordic currencies, being able to offer those, the batch payments, being able to offer local mobile payment schemes that companies are asking for, and continuing to expand that client base. It is an area where there's also a lot of regulatory development when it comes to how you can actually interact with local payment schemes. We are evolving our offering to be able to meet the client demands there. Some clients want to integrate directly with local schemes and need us as a facilitator. Others are looking for participating in local schemes through an indirect participation setup. We're happy to meet the needs on that. So we're really focused on just making sure that we deliver the right proposition for the client base that we have. I don't have any sort of new exciting client announcements to make here and now. We already have some of the biggest names in the business actually using Moonrise. So for example, you have Trustly that many of you I'm sure are familiar with that are using our services. We have Currency Cloud, which is part of Visa, right, that are using our services. And we're in discussions with a pipeline that consists of other payment companies that are some of the biggest payment companies in the world. So we're super excited about the future potential of that. And I think we're also experimenting with some new business models where we can further reduce the barriers for global players that are looking to come into the Nordics and really provide what may look as a localized experience with local account numbers and local payments, but delivered without the need to have any physical or legal branches set up on behalf of our clients. So much more exciting news to come, but I would love to make some announcements, but maybe I can have an option to come back and talk about that next time.
Yeah, definitely. You have to keep us posted as you go along, but it sounds like exciting times ahead. So just to finish things off then, I mean, what's next for Lunar in general then in the near-term future? And is there anything else in the pipeline there you can tell us about?
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, now we just passed the 1 million user mark. Incredibly excited about that and really now celebrating the fact that we're live with a full service proposition in the Nordics. we are able to be that primary bank for consumers and the small businesses. And now it's really a case of how do we continue to scale and grow off the back of those propositions, seeing some incredible traction in the small business space, especially with some fantastic growth that we're getting there. We're also looking at how do we continue to evolve our consumer offering and really meet the needs of consumers in the region. Especially, we're doing some thinking right now. We have a great crypto offering, actually, like I said, the only crypto offering within a bank in the Nordic region. How do we continue to evolve our offering within the investment space? So definitely spending a lot of time thinking about that. And then on the business side, thinking very much about how do we continue to evolve the offering when it comes to payments. Payments is super integral for small business owners. How do we evolve the fact that you want to make those payments in a simple and straightforward way within your banking infrastructure? It's a space where we're also seeing a lot of accounting firms and accounting SaaS providers are leaning into payments. So definitely something that we think is super intriguing for us to focus more on. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's really just a case of continuing to scale on the base of what we have and delivering that great service to customers on a day-to-day basis, which, as we know, is hard work just doing that. And then we try and keep growing the business as well. So it's going to be a pretty intense 25.
Thanks again, Mats, for joining us today. I mean, to close out the podcast, we have our now infamous FinTech Jail. So this is where we ask for an industry term, buzzword, or trend that you've seen or heard enough of. Or, of course, you can advocate to free one of the previously incarcerated terms. So what would your selection be for this week?
I had a long, hard look at the jail list, and actually I have a personal favorite of mine that I believe you have in jail there. I can't remember how you termed it, whether it was alternative payment methods, I believe, or APMs that you have put. Some people call them LPMs, but I think most of us call them APMs. So APMs is basically local payment methods that are kind of not your standard rails, right? Essentially not card rails. And I want to call it best sellers, or one of our best performing products in our Moonrise entity, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of businesses out there that want to be able to offer other essentially merchants or other businesses the opportunity to pay in the way that's most relevant and useful for local consumers. And APMs like Swish or Vipps or in Norway or Mobile Pay in Denmark are great ways of doing so. So I think putting APMs in jail that's a real shame. It's a massive opportunity for anyone who works in payments across Europe, actually, or even across the world, to be able to provide that preferred payment service, and really want to take that out of jail and make sure that we talk more about APMs and the value that they can actually bring.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I think when this was added to the jail, it was argued that the almost lack of specificity of the term might have been doing all the various different payment methods out there a disservice, and essentially kind of having anything other than cash and card gets lumped into the alternative payment methods tag. Well, as you mentioned, a lot of these methods are actually more popular in some areas of the world now. So, I mean, is that something you'd agree with, or do you still think it's necessary to have a catch-all term for all of these different methods out there?
I think it makes sense to have a term that we can slot in these different payment mechanisms under, right? Then, of course, it's always a case of how far do you stretch it. But if you don't talk about it, you lose the focus. So we need to have some category of categorizing these different nuances of payments under. And I think APM is a great category for doing so.
Excellent. Yeah, no, you make a good argument there and sounds good to me. I'm more than happy to let alternative payment methods out of the jail then for this week. For now, Mats, thank you so much again for joining us for the podcast today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to people.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks, of course, to Mats for joining me. As for FinTech Futures, you can find us online at fintechfutures.com, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to keep up with the latest FinTech news. If you like this podcast and our other episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcasting service to get notified about future episodes. Thanks as well to Arama for editing this podcast. You can check them out at arama.tv. As always, thank you very much for your support, and we'll see you soon for another episode of What the FinTech. But until then, goodbye.